Oscar's freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filled with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run. This is the way you do it.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio!
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other world. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Well, shalom and welcome everyone to another Ask Me Anything monthly session with researcher, speaker, and author Gary Wayne. This is your host, Lisa George. We've received a bunch of questions during last month's show that Gary will be answering today. And if you do have a question for Gary, please join the live chat on YouTube and put it in all caps so that we can see your question. I'll be retrieving the questions. I'm not sure if my niece will be joining us, but if you put it in all caps, there's a really good chance that I'll be able to see your questions. We just wanted to thank the moderators, Sherry and Tammy, for your help tonight. And Brother Gary, are you there?
I am, and I am very happy to be back tonight, and really looking forward to the questions. And by the looks of it, we'll probably get at a number of chat questions tonight. So should be a very good show.
Oh, great. Yes, looking forward to it. And just so you know, I am finally in the last section of your book, the fig tree generation part. And I've only gotten about 2 chapters into that section just because I was so stuck on the chapter about the Queen of Heaven, Inanna, like all those different names. But and I'm sorry, I just went in there because I was so excited to share that with you. But let me get you to share your information, Gary, where people can buy your book. I know Sherry's been putting the links up in the chat already. So if you guys have not read Gary's book, book 1 and book 2, I was just describing book 2 that I am totally enthralled with. And I'm taking it a lot slower than I took book 1 because it's just, there's so much detail. There's no way you can like speed read through this. So Gary, if you could share your information and how people can reach you and get your book.
I will, and I just wanted to, mention a little bit about those chapters on Babylon and the Queen of Heaven and all the different sort of Mary apparitions and things that have gone on in the past and continue to this day. And I think it's, there's so many parts I like about book 2, but I really like bringing all of that information together and then connecting that back to the prehistory side, and helps us to understand who Babylon is and what the allegories surrounding Babylon are. And I know there's at least one question that we'll be answering tonight, that asking about Babylon and the woman. So yeah, I think I've brought in some very interesting data points there for people to consider. So, it's a mystery as to who Babylon will be, but I think we're guided by things in history where it might be. I might be wrong on it, but there's just so many data points pointing in one direction. So glad you like that part of the book. So for people who are looking to get a hold of me or to purchase my books, the easiest way to do that is through the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. On that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1 and all 84 chapters of book 2. And I also have on the media page, I have I'm thinking 16 videos that I'm going to leave up there as permanent as I can. One is one I did a video with a group of people that I worked with right from the beginning, and just sort of talked about the Genesis conspiracy project, and that one has like over 1 million views on it, so it's a highly watched view. And then the other one is with a radio host who is a Christian, but kind of a doubting Christian. And so we go through each section of each book in a 2-hour section for each, covering the highlights, but then having her ask the tough questions as to questions that she has and what other Christians have. And so I think it gives a lot of information about the book. So, and if you like what I say, if you like what the videos and the write-ups on the book are talking about, you can get a signed copy from me. You can go to the Buy Now page. And on the Buy Now page, I have a Buy Now book for book 1, for book 2, and then for mixed bundling. So, and there's discounts on each page. But if you want to get both books and get the discount, go to page 3 on the Buy Now page, and you can mix and match any way that you want. There's an email attachment on there that say you buy 7 books. You can say, I want 5 of book 1 and 2 of book 2, or whatever the number is. And then also on that email, send to me how you want that addressed to, and or if you have a custom signing for any one of those. So I have a page set up on the Buy Now page for Canada, a page for the US, and then the international page for the rest of the world. So wherever you live, that's where you go. I also have links over to Amazon for the Kindle versions of both books and for the audio version of both books, and been very happy with the release of the audio books. They've been ranking very high. Book 1 came out in September and December for book 2, and ranking very high. And the other books are, the other formats are doing good as well, but I have not had access to the audio before this. So you can get that book in 3 different formats, both books in 3 different formats. And the easiest way to link over there is through my website. And there's also a contact the author section. So if you want to get a hold of me, ask me a question. I am really working hard the last few weeks to start to catch up on some of the emails. So I'm hoping to shorten that waiting time pretty soon.
Right on. Just good deals all around. I mean, if everybody heard that, you're bundling things, you got audio. It's just the knowledge is increasing here in the last days, and you're a big part of it, Gary. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to actually just touch on something from that chapter I mentioned. It's called Babylon in Gary's book 2. And he's talking about the Queen of Heaven. And like you said, there is a question that we'll be addressing today that talks about this as well, but I wanted to make a quick connection. I'm not sure if you've heard this before, Gary, but we visited Israel 11 years ago, And we visited one part of that. Well, actually, we visited a lot of that entire country because we were there about 6 weeks touring around. And one of the places I remember is a place called Aloha, because it sounds so much like aloha, for Hawaii. And then Gary addressed this particular entity as Eloah, as a powerful goddess. And I think it's really interesting. It's the first time I'd ever heard of this, Gary, that this Queen of Heaven, I believe you said that she could be one of the, like a powerful watcher or a powerful Nephilim giant. Is that what you were kind of alluding to in this chapter, Gary?
Well, it's interesting because as you apply the feminine version of Elohim in the plural, which is the male plural, Eloah is the feminine plural, and so you have kind of two choices as to how that feminine suffix might be applied, and it's very much similar to Gibborim and Gibberah. And in those two examples, you have the mighty ones, but it can also be used for mighty in the male. And then in the application or the action of the definition, as in being mighty or strong, that's where Gibberah tends to be applied, and it's consistent throughout the Bible that way. But you could also translate that as a female Gibborim as well, or Gibbor in the single. So you have those two choices with Eloah that happens in Daniel 11 with the god of fortresses. And that's the Hebrew Maus for fortresses, which is rooted in Az and Azaz, the two suffixes for Azazel, meaning strong and powerful, and fortresses and forces as well. And this is the god that Antichrist worships in secret, is this god of fortresses, as it's translated in English. And God there isn't El, and it isn't Elohim, it is Eloah. So now you have an interesting choice there, and it may be both for all we know, but there's certainly an application of the fortresses, because Antichrist is going to be, a significant warrior dictator as he runs the earth and leads us into Armageddon in the last 3.5 years. And he takes credit, I think, for winning World War III. Revelation 9, Joel 1 and 2, and Ezekiel 38 and 39. That's his Armageddon war he rides to power on and takes credit for, in terms of how I understand that. So he could be, honoring or just applying that as the god of forces, and maybe Azazel is the one that he is worshiping in secret. But we also have a missing counterpart for Satan, who will be basically the basis for the Antichrist religion versus Babylon that Antichrist destroys. And in polytheism, you have a dualism aspect, particularly in several different ways, but particularly in this way is the mother goddess and the male god. And so we don't have a counterpart for Satan that's listed in the Bible. But we do have a creature that could also be a double meaning, or it actually is talking about Satan and his consort with Leviathan, where the female is destroyed and killed by God in the Bible, and other gods like Baal and Marduk and Indra all around the world for their accounting of the same killing of this very powerful female Leviathan type god. And so I don't think you kill an immortal being, particularly before let's say what the lake of fire might be created, but all of the fallen angels that were punished went to the pit prison, right? The ones that violated the law. So that's kind of like a death-like situation for all those gods that have disappeared. Like all of the parent gods were said to be killed in polytheism. So you could make it akin to that. The female was sent to the pit prison. And in the end time, that pit prison is open. So you might have that part of the female dualism coming back. That's the female goddess that Antichrist might worship in secret. And there's another interesting name for Leviathan that's used in the Bible, which is Rahab. And I wonder whether or not Rahab might be the name for the female consort, because it's like, why are we getting two different stories about Leviathan with two different Hebrew words and two different sort of seemingly names or designations? And so maybe that's part of the whole mystery. So we also have in Isaiah 29, I think verse 1, if I've got the passages right, is you have the Leviathan who is going to be slain in the end time, which is very odd, because it's kind of, if you apply what I just said about what happened to the female Leviathan, Satan goes to the pit prison for 1,000 years.
Yeah. What happened to that? Okay.
Yeah, so there's a connection there that you could say that would be the female mother goddess, and maybe it's both for all we know, but it's a bit of a mystery. But I put both options into the book, and I'm open to both because it is such a mysterious passage.
Yeah, it really is. And I was going to say, too, it's really ironic where this area called Eloah is located in modern Israel today. It's located up in the northeast corner, which is also where tribe of Dan was given their land, and also where Bashan is located. So I thought that was it's a beautiful part of Israel. It's gorgeous.
And you have a city that was named in Genesis 14 as Ashtaroth Karnaim, which is and Ashtaroth is the female goddess of counterpart to El, versus Anat, who's the queen of heaven after the flood with Baal. So El is the king of heaven, and Ashtaroth is the antediluvian queen of heaven, and that means a two-horned Ashtaroth, right? As in a bull understanding of that, and so again, you get this sort of connection to this mother goddess that things get pointed towards, and it's just something we need to pay more attention to as the end times get a little bit closer, and to see what the impact and how that mother goddess is going to play both in Babylon and in the Antichrist religion. And you might also be interested to know that as you dig deeper in behind Eloah, it has some, I can't remember whether it's derivatives or it derives from, but there are, I think it's Aramaic, so it would be very much associated words as they're connected in the Hebrew dictionary, and it actually starts with A-L, so Eloah.
Yes.
So aloha is what is, so I thought I'd just throw that out as well. So
wow, yeah, that is really interesting. And then knowing what we know about the land that I live in right now in Hawaii, and how that can be traced back to very similar deities as you just described, Gary. But I'm so sorry, I'm taking your time here. We need to get to these questions. Thank you so much again for commenting on the chapter I'm reading. It's always exciting to read your book, and then I have things on my mind and I can ask you here once a month. So it's really good. Also, too, if anybody has questions for Gary outside of this Ask Me Anything, or you'd like to read any of his manuscripts, he's written so many that are not even part of the books, and so many different topics. If there's a certain topic that you're really interested in, that's something that Gary might have that's related to the Bible, Gary probably has something to say about it. So you can always email him and ask him questions and ask for particular manuscripts, which I've done over the years. They're extremely helpful. Okay, so let's get into these questions here. The first question we have is from J. Mary, and they're asking, do angels have souls, and can souls be stolen?
Yeah, a couple of very, very good questions there. And so I would, my simple answer to the first question is, do angels have souls? I would say yes, but distinct from what we would understand a soul for a human. So in understanding this, the first thing to understand is that in 1 Thessalonians 5:23, it discusses there's a soul, a body, and a spirit. And so there's three components. And so when we die as a human, our spirit goes back to heaven and likely stays in a sleep state, as all of the allegories or descriptions for the most part on death is using a sleep allegory. So it returns to heaven, whereas a counterfeit spirit doesn't. It either roams the earth, it goes to the pit prison, or as the polytheists believe, it goes to their heaven, which is Hades or Sheol, where their gods rule from. So there are three significant parts. And understanding that our spirit returns to heaven implies that our spirit came from heaven. And so that merges with the soul in the physical world. So the soul and the body is of the physical world, and the spirit comes from heaven, and the soul will merge with the spirit, and that will, in that forming, will form as an extension, as the New Testament explains, is the mind. So you have this inhabitation of the soul and the body, and that's understood as an oiketerion, which means a dwelling place or a dwelling place for the spirit. So once we understand that, then we can employ that application of the word oiketerion as it applies to Jude 1:6, where it says those angels left their habitation, which is the Greek word oiketerion. And so they left their oiketerion, their dwelling place for their spirit, their habitation in heaven, and they came to the earth. Now, there's one other passage in the New Testament that has oiketerion. There are derivatives that are used, but specifically for the oiketerion word is in 2 Corinthians 5:2, when it's explaining that we have our house in heaven. We have a house in heaven that's being arranged for us, that we groan for, but in the meantime our house is on the earth. So that's a dwelling place, right? So that's another place where oiketerion is used specifically, and it's all talking about an oiketerion for heaven and an oiketerion on the earth, or the soul and the body on the earth. So whatever the oiketerion is in heaven, I can't explain except that they have one, and it's seemingly distinct from the physical world. So they have an oiketerion that we might classify as a soul and whatever else comes with it, because they're a spirit being. I don't see a body, but by sort of deduction, there's a place that that spirit might live in, which would be soul-like, but a spirit soul versus a physical soul. And so something unique and distinct from humans. So my simple answer is yes, they have something that's similar but different. And there are different kinds of spirits, as we're told in the Ruach of the Old Testament for the definition of pneuma in the New Testament. And as you look at both of those definitions, you learn that there's a spirit for angels that's different than a spirit for humans, and that is a different spirit than what the animal kingdom has. So there's different kinds of spirits. And one would suspect that the Holy Spirit, the Word as was spirit, and El Elyon as a spirit would be distinct spirits as well. So different kinds of spirits, so to speak. So the next question is can a soul be stolen? And that's an interesting question, because we don't really use the right terminology in this world for a spirit and a soul and a body. We tend to use the word soul, which is a polytheist sort of understanding, and that they're counterfeit spirits for the giants. They're kind of, the soul and the body are kind of the same thing. They're all of this physical world, and they're not allowed in heaven, whereas our spirits will be allowed in heaven again, even after the resurrection, with a new oiketerion, a new body, a new kind of body that can go back and forth, that is distinct from what we have today, and like the body that Jesus resurrected and went back to sit at God's right-hand side in this physical body. So something new there. So we have an interesting passage also in Jude. And Jude, for such a small chapter, has so much information in it. It's just crazy. You have this scenario in Jude 1:9 where Satan has come for the body and thus the soul of Moses. And one would include he's demanding the right to the spirit too. And so Michael is sent to trump that because Moses has completed his commission that he was created to do. And so Satan had rights to this based on, I think, the oaths that were taken at Heliopolis, because as Moses being adopted into the Royal Raphaim bloodline of the pharaohs, was educated at Heliopolis and would have become an adept at childhood and taken all of the oaths and sworn his loyalty to Satan. So Satan is there to say, I want that soul in the body, and by implication, the spirit has to go with it. So there's a commitment that binds all three there. And so from a physical world perspective, unless there's an intervention by God, is the soul can be stolen, even though our spirit might be going to sleep, but Satan will claim that spirit as his, I think, and one that's not going to be resurrected to eternity, but to the second death and or to the lake of fire, as the people of the mark of the beast have as well. So in that sense, you could steal the soul, but essentially they're after the spirit, right? They want to corrupt the spirit that's gone back to heaven, and they want to make sure that that spirit isn't going to reach the destiny that we're all provided to have an opportunity to choose God or not.
Right. Very good points, Gary. I just wanted to see if you had caught your little slip where you said Michael was sent to trump that. I just thought that was interesting wording there, but I know you didn't mean it as talking about our president. Okay, so
yes, he's powerful, but he's not that powerful.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, oh wow, he's connected to Michael even. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so question number 2 from Sacks of Green 420. What is the story of the Knights Templar, Jerusalem, and does it relate to Zionism and the Jews today?
It's a really good question, and it's a significant part of our history in the West, and it has evolved to become a mythos, and it's a legend and a mythology that lives on and through generations with significant importance. And kind of the legend we have is kind of remembered in what I would call Tolkien's and Lewis's mythopoetic style about the history of the bloodlines and the giants, based on the facts that they say they are is fiction based on the facts. And so you get this interesting sort of mythology, but you have to look at the characters, you have to look at the symbolism, the imageries, the locations, the names, and then you start to dig into that there's probably more going on with these Templars than first meets the eye. So again, typical in the mythology of as being a mythopoetic style. So there is a connection to the Knights Templar to Jerusalem, and its connection in part to Zionism, and Zionism of the mystical side versus the monotheist side, so the polytheist sides. So in 1099, the Knights Templar took Jerusalem, and a fellow by the name of Godfrey de Bouillon of Boulogne, or in the Lorraine region, was the leader of this newly formed order of Knights Templar that's leading the crusade. And he becomes the first Grand Master of this organization that is going to split into a lower level in 1118 of what we would now know as the Knights Templar, and Hugh de Payon, a battle partner of Sinclair at that time, Henry Sinclair, who was also there and one of the founders, will become the first Grand Master of the junior order, and the top order would be the Priory of Sion. And of course, the Priory of Sion is a secret order of royals that nominate, and they're barons, the Council of Barons, as William F. Tyr will call them in his accounting. They will decide who's going to be the king of Jerusalem, because Godfrey de Bouillon is awarded first rulership over Jerusalem as king-like, although he kind of officially does not accept the kingship title. But then Baldwin I, his brother, takes over after a year because Godfrey dies, and then in 1118, his cousin Baldwin II is going to be crowned King of Jerusalem. So now you're starting this bloodline of the kings of heaven, and these are titles of kings of Jerusalem that are around even to this day, and it has this long lineage, and I cover some of it off in book 2. And the one who holds the King of Jerusalem title today is King Philippe Bourbon of Spain, who inherited from the von Habsburgs, who received the title through intermarriage and scioning in of the Anjou of Lorraine, which includes the folk of Anjou, who is actually Baldwin II, as he's crowned in 1118 in a small priory on the Rock of Zion. And so you get this sort of interconnection of these royals with the King of Jerusalem title, and that they feel they have the rights to Jerusalem, and it's there for a reason. So in the time of the Exodus, Joshua awards the rights to the city of Jerusalem to the Benjamites, even though it's not taken until the time of David and kept. The Benjamites were provided that as their inheritance. And so I mentioned the word scioning, which is an intermarriage of first individuals, and it's also it's also an allegory for grafting in of bloodlines. So you have multiple giant bloodlines in this royal bloodline, but how that connects back to Jerusalem is through, and I cover this off in detail in terms of these scionings in book 1. You have Benjamite bloodlines from King Saul that come through 2 different avenues, one being Mary Magdalene in their view, and the other one being the Benjamites that migrated up the Danube River and into Germany, and then intermarried into the Sicambium Franks, which is going to become the Merovingian dynasty. So that's one bloodline. Then the other bloodline is the Davidic bloodline, which they do through the Essene bloodline, or the Essene representatives of the royal bloodline that are going to move into northern Spain and southwest France and Septimania in particular. And those bloodlines are going to intermarry in with the Merovingian bloodline as well. So now you have the Davidic bloodlines. And then they add in Jesus and Mary Magdalene in their belief system, not my belief system, and that Jesus didn't die on the cross, and that Joseph of Arimathea helped Jesus heal back to recover, had children, and the third one, Josephus, was taken to Glastonbury, who intermarried into the Camelot dynasties and the Pendragon dynasties. And then you have a female from that bloodline after Josephus. It'd be 2 generations later, will be a female born named Urgan that's going to intermarry with Amenabad of the Merovingian bloodline. So they have Judaic bloodlines, and King David allegedly and falsely claiming from Jesus. They don't technically need that, but they feel a need to put that in there because they still have that Davidic bloodline, right? So,
right.
But it's the King Saul bloodline that gives them the right to Jerusalem and that King of Jerusalem title. So now, how does that fit in with Zionism, right? And so Zionism is formed in the 1800s for the most part, and there's going to be this movement that is going to come from the polytheist side of Judaism that is working in conjunction with many of the secret societies, and particularly as you get into Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. There's a lot of Zionism and Illuminati that are intermixed in there. And so you have a creation of this state through a series of wars that the bloodlines are having this inter-family battle that is one of the manifestations that comes out of it is the creation of the modern state of Israel. And biblically, we're not told how they end up in the prophecies that show them there before the second Exodus. They're just there. So this seems to be the contrived way that they get them there, and they leverage World War II for getting a nation state that's dominated by the polytheist side. So who's the polytheist side that would be associated with the secret societies? Well, the secret societies say it's two groups of polytheism that are very much interrelated with a number of other ones like Mandaeans and Sabians and others, but the two major ones from Judaic society is Kabbalism and the Essenes, or Essenism. And so they are part of that whole Zion movement within the secret societies as a sister polytheist religion. So and when you look at the Essenes, you know, most people think that they're the original Christians, right? Because of the very what I would say clever way of conflating different sort of terms. So Essenes do call themselves Nazarenes and Nazarites. And the original part of the Nazarite aspect, which they corrupt, in my opinion, was the strict dietary laws that the original Nazarite, like Samson, followed. But then they added on a whole bunch of other ascetic dietary things that weren't really part of the original Nazarite, and that's the Hebrew word Nazir. Okay, so it's very, very similar, right? So when they're talking about calling themselves Nazarites or Nazareth, it's not from Nazareth. If you look at the Greek definitions for Nazareth, I mean, it can mean one that's separated as what a Nazarite is, but Nazareth is not connected to the Hebrew Nazarite.
Right.
And so they're two different sort of meanings. In fact, you know, the Nazareth and Nazarite is connected directly to Jesus, and he's actually called that as a slur in the book of Acts, as we get the accounting of it. So we need to understand that spelling is Nazir, Nazir, and so you want to go Nazarite or Nazarene. It's using the suffix. It's an extrapolation to arrive at the same meaning with the two different suffixes. The other word that's used is the Hebrew word Natsar.
Yes.
And Natsar is a very, very important word, because once we link in that the Knights Templar were the keepers of the message, the keepers of the secret, and keepers of the bloodline secrets. So the bloodlines for the dragon Messiah that they want to present, they keep, and they were the inheritors of ancient knowledge, just as the Essenes were. So now if we look at the word Natsar, and it is a word in Hebrew as well, and it means to be to guard and to receive knowledge, and in this case ancient knowledge, and this is the knowledge that comes from the fallen angels. So when you read about historical accounts of the Essenes, and particularly through Josephus and a couple other historians, they would not give up the names of their fallen angels even on to death that they worshipped. So yeah, and then the other aspect is the Kabbalism, which is so Essene takes their religion back to Heliopolis, which they say is the same religion that Jesus was taught, and that religion was given to the Israelites, and then it went rogue sometime with the monarchy. So they believe they're worshiping the original pure polytheist religion that Moses brought back, which is why most Essenes, when you get into deep conversations with them, they reject most of the New Testament and a ton of the Old Testament, right? So that's usually a sign that you're not dealing with the monotheist side. So when we look at the word Kabbalah, that's QBL. So you get organizations that have a Q association to it. Be careful. That's usually a tell as to it might be a Kabbalist organization. So in Kabbalah, QBL in the original Hebrew, 6902 QBAL or QABBEL on the Aramaic side means to receive and to take knowledge. And this is the basis for this hidden knowledge, and it means caretakers and watchers and guardians of divine knowledge. And so this is the Babylonian side of polytheism that comes back with the Judeans after the exile. Essenes predate it, but these are the two systems that come down, and they're after the disbursement in 70 AD in Jerusalem. Both Kabbalism and Essenism is going to go over with the remnants of the Jewish people into Europe, and in particularly in northern Spain and southwest France, and into Septimania, where they're going to intermarry with these Rex Deus or Royale bloodlines.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for expanding on that, Gary. I had no idea that who the Essenes were, except for a little tiny bit of teaching about them from a former Jewish professor. And then you really cleared that up with book 1. You have like an entire chapter just called the Essenes, right? So that really helps.
And it's really good to note that how the secret societies look at them. And a lot of people say, well, that's their belief system, but that's not who they are. But if you pull out all of the historical versions, I have a document I send out to people quite regularly. All the historians talk about them in the same way. And it's an ancient religion that predates Israel in one of the, as Pliny talks about.
Yeah, they were like sun worshippers. I believe that you discussed that a little bit. And also that there's that verse about the men standing in the temple facing east and worshiping the sun or something like that, that alludes
Ezekiel
a little
8,
bit to them.
yeah.
That's the one, right?
Ezekiel 8, yeah.
Ezekiel 8. Okay, great. There. And Gary, just so you know, Sacks of Green, who asked this question, is in the chat right now, and he's just ecstatic and so excited for the answer you just gave. So thank you again for that. And also, I would like to recommend that you said you have a full manuscript with more details about this, right, Gary?
I do. Designed particularly for Christians who have not heard this information, and it's directly sort of antithetic to a lot of things that Christians do say about the Essenes, and I think it's a very large deception.
Yes, oh, totally. So Sacks of Green, if you're listening right now, please email Gary, ask him for that manuscript. There's even more information. He's got it all written in there. I think that might have been one of the ones I asked you for, Gary, and it's amazing, all the links and everything that comes to light that Gary brings forth here. But we'll go on to the next question. Question number 3. This is from Faith Parent. If one is related to the Windsor Royals, are they at higher risk for abduction?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I'll answer it again in 2 parts, because I think there's a distinction between lower level bloodlines and highly pure bloodlines who I think have a different sort of position and connection to whether or not it is alien abduction, I'll get the word out yet, or fairy or elemental abduction, or other types of abductions. And so as we look at the bloodlines of the Royales, they have the highest purity level, and they are at the highest of the hierarchy in the physical world, answering to the invisible ones. And so I don't think they are going to be abducted. I think they would be in charge and oversee the elementals or the aliens. And how, if people haven't heard me before on this subject or read my book, a lot of the aliens, I think, can be accounted for through polytheism, through the different types of creatures that the gods present. And that term elementals is going to show up in Galatians and in Colossians, and it's going to be rudiments and elementals, and it's the Greek word stoichian. And these are the ones that enslave us in the earth. Other applications will be actually the elementals of the universe, which is the basic parts of the universe. So two different meanings and two different applications. Inanimate objects can enslave us in the world. So it's the same term as elements that enslave us that is used in the four groups of the cult elementals, three groups of little ones and one salamander one that is larger than humans and reptilian, all matched up to the basic elements of the world like fire, wind, air, things like that in their belief system. And within one of the groups is a ugly section of little ones, and you have these gnomes who are in charge of flying machines, technology, and knowledge and genealogies for the hierarchy. And they come through fairy dolmens or portals in these UAPs, and they kidnap people. And their description of their abductions and the descriptions of these gnomes are identical to the Greys in the alien mythos. And these are actually called the Greys as a certain sect of the gnomes, elemental people. So I think there's a connection there, but I think they would answer up to the royales in the physical world aspect of that. Now, if you are a descendant of the royales and you have a lot more intermarriage amongst non-gene-driven royales, then you might experience more abductions. And so whether it's via NASA or by other groups and organizations that have looked at the Rh negative bloodline, that would be a derivative of the gene. And it's the gene that produces and introduced this bloodline. So through the intermarriage with humans, so that they don't go extinct after the flood, their genes are going to be the ones that are going to produce the Rh negative bloodline. So here's just a couple of things that would go with, and this is consistent, and I pulled a number of surveys, but these are the ones that are consistent. So, and I won't go through all of them, but larger heads and eyes, lower blood pressure, higher percentages of blonde and red hair, higher percentages of blue and green and hazel eyes, better vision, improved senses, and subject, and this is a really important one, subject to more alien abductions and unexplained phenomena. And another one that's really interesting, the last one on the list, is they believe they cannot be cloned. They don't know how or why. They just don't believe they can be cloned. So I would say as you get lower in that bloodline, that's who are more likely to have more of these abductions, as opposed to just communicating with these other groups.
Great answer as usual, Gary. And thank you. The person asking that question is in the chat, and she thinks that it might explain some things that have happened in her life. So interesting connections there for sure with the abduction part of it. Let's go on to the next question. And this is, I think, the question that we actually started the show with when I had some questions on this particular chapter from Todd Dossett. And we have about 10 minutes to break. So if you don't get through this entire question, because I know you have several chapters addressing this particular point in your book, we can always carry it on over till after break. So Todd Dossett is asking, what does it mean the woman rides the beast?
It's a really good question, and the passage that's being referred to is going to be in Revelation 17, and I would look at two verses in there to sort of get the meaning of what's going to happen with the woman riding the beast in Revelation 17. Mystery Babylon is the woman. And so you have in verse 3, you have this woman that's described who is sitting on this beast. And it's sitting and upon the beast, so sitteth and upon. And then in verse 7, the woman and the beast is carrying the woman. So we want to look at both of those descriptions and look at them in combination. So the word sit in verse 3 is kathomai, which Greek word kathomai, and it means to sit, to be seated, to reside or dwell within. and to live in a fixed abode. And there's a couple other nuances. So when Babylon is sitting on this beast, it's all of that's being talked about. But when we talk about the beast empires, that's what we're actually talking about with the beast. So as it is described in Revelation 12, 13, and 17, this is the end time empire. And we're getting other allegorical descriptions in the combination of those three passages in Revelation of the empire's past. And so this is a woman that is dwelling upon and within the beast empires. And it's the 7 beast empires of the post-Diluvian world. So we get them called as beast empires in Daniel 7. And these are the ones that are stirred up by the 4 winds of prophecy to bring the empires, starting with the king of Babylon, but not including the 2 that came before, which all had interaction with Israel. All the beast empires interact with Israel, so they'll interact with Israel in a significant way in the end time. And part of the whole prophetic understanding that you have to get a better understanding of what's coming in the end time. So when we look at the 2 before Babylon, that's going to be Assyria, where Israel grew up in, became a nation, and you're also going to have, did I say Assyria there? I'm sorry, Egypt, where which Israel grew up in when Joseph went there, and then you're going to have Assyria, which is the next beast empire. Now you can make a good case going back to Nimrod, but Nimrod creates Assyria anyways, and Babylon is rooted in the Hebrew word for Babel. So that religion is the same religion of Nimrod, but it's the same religion of all of the beast empires past and future. So it's going to be a mystery religion, initiatory religion, and this is the mother. So this is going to be the one that produced all of the daughters of Babylon that went with the polytheist religions, and even as they're referred to within the original beast empire. So this is the original mother one coming back as the queen of heaven, as those allegories sort of come together in the end time. So understanding that these are the 7 kings and the 7 hills that Babylon sits on, the 7 kings being the 7 kings of the beast empire. So she rides this beast of empires, and then in verse 7, it says that the beast carries her. And that's the Greek word pistazo, which means to carry, as in to bear, to carry the burden, or sustains that religion. It's part of the hierarchy of the beast empires after the flood, and by definition and inference, as all the empires that were before the flood that were trying to do the same thing, because nothing is new under the sun.
Right.
What was will be again. And the understanding of this only brings grief and sorrow, as Ecclesiastic 1 tells us. And so they're always trying to bring about the end time. And so now if we understand that this is a mystery religion, mysterion, and it's the allegories that are used to describe it as a prostitute or a harlot, and all the words that are associated with that, those are the descriptions in the Old Testament for the religions that Israel would worship. And those are the allegories used to describe the worshiping of other gods versus the worshiping of the God Most High. So this is the one that is going to be coming again, because it's sustained within the beast empires. And that when you ride, it says, in a rider of a horse, where you have reins. And reign as in rule. So she's going to reign over the empire of the end time, just as she did with the beast empires before, so much so that the 10 kings who are subservient to the woman, the religion of Babylon, is they're going to grow jealous and give their power over to Antichrist at the midpoint of the last 7 years, just as Revelation 17 says. So understanding that this is the religion that's riding the beast of empires, controls the beast of empires, grows rich, and the 10 kings of the seventh empire are going to be so upset they're going to produce the eighth empire by giving Antichrist their power at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So when we talk about the woman riding the beast, we have to understand that she's in control of those empires is the inference, and particularly as reigns and as a rider as what we would know, or as a chariot rider as well. You have the reins, you are in control.
Right. Wow. That's a lot of information, Gary. And I'm looking at this chapter as you're going through these verses in Revelation, and it's very clear. Like, as you said, it's two different Greek words for the sit upon and for carrieth her. So that makes total sense of what you just said about the different parts of the beast system. So thank you so much for that, Gary. We have like 2 minutes left. The next question might be a little bit longer. So I actually do have one other thing I wanted to bring up with you before we go to break. As I was been reading through your book, like I said, and talking about the woman who rides the beast, I just think it's so interesting that, very similar to Satan, to Azazel, who has so many different names, Lucifer, Samael, Gadriel, for like the head honcho Satan. The same thing is very true of this mother goddess of this entity that you're describing in this chapter called Babylon in book 2. Did you want to expand on that any more for like about 2 minutes, Gary, and have any more explanations about that? I'm looking at this paragraph where you said Revelation 17, woman of Babylon is referenced as her 7 times, suggesting a goddess. And I just think that connection is so important for people to know.
Yeah, and that term Queen of Heaven is what she's called in the Bible. And we also have a Queen of Heaven that is talked about in the book of Jeremiah, where they're sacrificing cakes or wafers in a ritual to the Queen of Heaven. So this is a term that's understood in the past, and the Queen of Heaven was not only a fertility goddess, but also generally, and is depicted with those 2 horns of Ashtaroth that we talked about earlier, as a war goddess.
Yes.
And so all of this is taking place in the rule of Babylon, right? As Babylon becomes this universal religion that sits on many waters. So in every polytheist religion, you have mother goddesses, both with parent gods that ruled before the flood and with offspring gods that rule after the flood. So, and that would be a Queen of Heaven, just as Ashtaroth is, and all the variations of Ashtaroth and Ishtar as ones before the flood. And Inanna is another one, which means, of heaven, and it has an interesting sort of etymological and Sumerian in its breakout. So this is a constant throughout prehistory and history.
Thank you, Gary. We're at break. We'll see you guys in a few minutes. Go get something to eat and drink, and we'll see you guys soon.
Take further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
When Justin and I found out we were having a little girl, we named her Eliana and started dreaming of what life would be like with her, where we would take her, what we would teach her, and of course, what we would read to her. One day we walked around a bookstore looking for books we might want for her and found nothing. So we started brainstorming what exactly we would want. Even from a young age, we wanted her to know and understand the heart of God and hidden truths that are in ancient biblical manuscripts like the Book of Enoch, and the idea of the Prophecy for Children series was born. Justin got hard to work and praise Yah released the Prophecy for Children series. We are grateful for the support and amazing feedback from others who have been wanting the same for their children. With our newest addition to the family, Ezra, we also added Enoch's Judgment of the Giants to this prophecy series. We're excited to keep writing books for our children to share with our truth-seeking family. To order these books today, please check out sacredwordpublishing.com/collections/children's-store.
Show them what we got here.
All right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Shalom and welcome back, everyone, to another Ask Me Anything monthly session with researcher, speaker, and author Gary Wayne. We are taking questions in the YouTube chat. If you have questions for Gary and you'd like him to answer you, please go into the YouTube chat and put in all caps so that we can see them and we can add them to our list for questions for next month. Gary's been covering quite a few questions so far, and we have quite a few left to go. So I think we'll just get right into it. Brother Gary, you there?
I am.
Okay, great. Did you want to say anything else? I think you covered that last question really well. Was there anything else you wanted to add to the woman rights of peace?
Two things I would also put on that in terms of some of the different names and titles is that the secret societies use allegories of post-Diluvian gods and goddesses that would be reflective of their true belief system as being at the top of the apex is an unknown female goddess, and slightly below would be Lucifer or Satan. Lucifer is one of the names, or the great architect of the universe, that they would call Satan. And so they use allegory. So what am I talking about? So they will use like Baal as an allegory for Satan. So he carries reflective attributes as the chief god after the flood. But understand, Satan sits above the council of the gods. The same thing is done with the female goddess, in this case, Anat. And I refrain from using what Freemasonry uses, which is the Egyptian post-Diluvian understanding, because the female goddess's name usually gets problematic on YouTube. So I'll say Osiris as the male. You can match up who the female is, and then Horus is the son or the Antichrist figure.
Oh, thank you for noting that, Gary. I had no idea. Okay.
Oh, yeah, it happens all the time. So, yeah. So,
wow.
And so it's important to understand that those are all allegories. They're all sun gods, which is another allegory for how they understand Satan and Lucifer. So the other thing to keep in mind is we have, because it's a Gnostic religion in the secret societies, we have their understanding of what this ultimate mother goddess is. And it's Sophia in Gnosticism, who created the 12 archons that Satan is also part of, and that they say the God of the Bible is also part of. And that she creates these 12 archons who rule, as rulers of the antediluvian world, as parent gods. And so, but through a nebulous male life force. So they're just kind of jockeying facts to suit a counterfeit belief system that seems to account for everything in the Bible, but really doesn't. And it's just a part of what they do. They usurp everything, and they try and lead people away from God with a lot of good history and a lot of bad history. So they mix both as they go through this. So it's an important concept to understand.
Yes, and even that name Sophia, we know Satan always twists everything for his evil works, but Sophia is wisdom in scripture, for as far as I know, and I also think that
it is.
Yeah, and
Well,
so
and
it's
here's how they, and so we need to understand how they use that, because again, philosophy is the theology of the seven sciences that produced mysticism. And philosophy means the love of Sophia.
Oh wow!
And
I never made that connection.
And philosophy is the arbitrator between the seven sciences. And using that theology as the arbitrator combines their collective power to create the great absolute that they like to talk about, and knowledge that has the ability to destroy the world by fire.
Wow, and I think that there's no accident that I can think of several of the European royals right now whose name is Sophia. So I don't think that's an accident either, right? I think there's one from Sweden, there's Princess Sophia from England, and I think maybe the Netherlands as well.
It is no accident. A lot of the names go back to gods and giants. So, if you look at, the Elbigens, and a giant named Albion, which is an offspring of Iapetus, you get names like Albert and Alberta.
Oh, right.
And derivatives of those names as names. So most of the names will have a double entendre meaning that's going back to specific patriarchal giants and celestial mafia godfathers.
Wow, that is super interesting. Okay, thank you again, Gary. We will move on to the next question here. And again, if anybody has questions for Gary, please put them in the YouTube chat so I can grab them and put them in all caps so I can see them. Thank you. All right, next question is from Hinky. What do you suppose Jesus did from the ages of 12 to 30, the missing years of his life in the Bible?
It's a really good question. So I'll do a little bit of preface on this. And so what's interesting about Jesus is that when he's born, he's ushered away to Egypt so that Herod can't have him killed. And so this is what they're trying to do to Jesus all the way through. But when he's finally crucified, it's his own people who violate the covenant and are going to push for him to be crucified. But this is important context to understand that Jesus is in jeopardy and all through his life. And even when he's teaching on his commission, he exits as fast as he can from some locations. And it's not that, as Jesus said, that if he asked that God wouldn't send, legions of angels to his aid, but that's not his commission. So he has to survive innocently and without that help to fulfill his commission, which is ultimate to be killed in a way that was prophesied in the Old Testament. And when it needed to be done on Passover to be part of the Old Testament prophecies and festivals, understood as a prophetic template for Israel. So this is context that helps us to answer the question. So we have some interesting passages in the Qur'an about Jesus and the miracles that aren't described in the Bible that are, things that is not able to be done by any sort of human, and that he spoke with such great wisdom when he was a child. But that latter part does match up with Luke 41 to 42, at the age of 12. So we know comes back after a period from Egypt and still a child, and then we know he's still being discussed in the temple and the land of the covenant by age 12. But we don't know when he leaves. And the accounting in Luke 2:41 to 42 is he's having these discussions with the priests in the temple, and they are amazed at his questions, and then when they're asking him questions as to his answers. And so roll this now forward to when he is walking amongst on his commission, and he is challenging the Pharisees, and he's challenging the Sadducees, and he's saying things that is troubling. They can't argue effectively against what he's saying. It's just that it is not provoking the right response that you would think that the priests who are expecting their Messiah would answer and react to, and they're going to set out to kill him. So if you're a child, and even at the age of 12, you're amazing the priests, you are in risk.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, if I look at the details, and then we don't see him until the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, which is somewhere around 27 AD. Some people would put it closer to 30 AD. But those are the historical sort of timings for Tiberius Caesar. We're hearing about him after a fairly large gap. And so if he was going to be at risk, it makes sense he would have gone elsewhere to be safe until he was ready to come back.
Yes.
And so when we now match that up with accounts outside the Bible where he went east, we have no idea the places he went. He could have went to many places to try and bring righteousness and truth in this polytheist world, and then kept moving on because they probably were running him out of town as well, so to speak. So I think he did probably travel to other locations because it would have been much safer than staying in the land of the covenant when he is saying things and he's not an adult yet. So this is a process, and I think it was done for his protection is the short answer, because of what the response would have been before its time.
Yes, I agree. I wanted to ask you too, along these same lines, have you heard of a book called The Travels of Christ in Tibet by any chance? Because you mentioned that he most likely could have just gone east or gone anywhere in the world. It's kind of an interesting document.
Yeah, I have, and there are traditions in India and elsewhere in the East of Jesus coming there and teaching.
Yes, and also too, there's another book that Zen and I are planning to cover in the next couple months called He Walked the Americas. I don't know if you've heard of that one. It's tribal elders that have their oral stories that have been written down, and they have really good descriptions that totally match Jesus' description, being in South America and Polynesia as well.
It's more common amongst the First Nations than what most people think in their history, and so again, that's why I kind of left it sort of open-ended. Is he may have went other places around the world as well, and it would make sense to try and create a better world, and for people maybe to start changing their views on the pantheon. But again, he could at least keep moving and be safe and not be recognized, right?
Right. That makes sense. Thank you for that answer, Gary. Let's move on to the next question from Dale Stevenson. Why will the birds survive the happenings in the book of Revelation?
It's a good question. I'm not sure that they get out as scot-free, so to speak, as not having any sort of destruction. So, but what we do know is the birds are going to feast at the Gog destruction, which is just before the midpoint of the last 7 years, in my understanding of end time chronology, and the war of Joel 1 and 2 and Revelation 9 that Antichrist comes to power on, as is Armageddon. And so when we look at Revelation 6, we get some a little bit of information, I think, that sheds some light on this. And so in verse 8, with the pale horse, he has the power over the beasts of the earth, and 25% destruction comes. Then with the trumpets, and with ultimately this Revelation 9 war, it's 33% destruction. And so it doesn't specifically say birds. So, but one would think that when you're saying it's the whole earth and they're giving out these different compartments on there, that many of the birds are destroyed as well. Now, because they're able to fly above, perhaps they would have less destruction. You could rationalize that. But I'm kind of thinking with the type of destruction that comes with the earthquakes and with the fires and with the weaponry that's going to be used, that I think they have as much destruction as the rest of the beasts and humans. And that even though 25% are destroyed, there's tons and tons of birds still available for the feast at the Gog War.
Right.
And again, you don't get the full destruction of Armageddon until the end, and that happens pretty quick, even though there's going to be wars leading up to that when Jesus comes and everybody, standing against him is slayed. So you would have a bunch of birds there as well. Now, again, I am open to the fact that maybe they are less smitten with these catastrophes of war and other things, but the language tends to suggest that there will be at least half of them left by doing the math on this for the Armageddon War. So there'd be plenty of birds, but it's a very good question, because it's like if everything's being destroyed, where do the birds come from?
Right. Yeah, I agree. That's a good question. Makes me think. All right, you ready for the next one, Gary? This is from Sacks of Green 420 again. He's asking, is astrology and the worship of the 7 planets a mockery of scripture? Why do people choose to worship the stars?
It's a good question, and why we really want to sort of understand the Bible and how it intersects with accountings around the world in polytheism and the secular world, and how that intersects in reverse back to the Bible. So we're told of wandering stars in the New Testament, and we're not told how many wandering stars, but in polytheism their number is 7 wandering stars. And wandering stars is in Jude 1:7 if people want to look at that.
Right.
And that is the Greek word planos. For the wandering, stars has another Greek word for star, but these are and planos is derives the planetus, and these are different words for planets, as we would transliterate that into English. And so the definition of planos is to be a deceiver, an imposter, and words like that. So again, if you look at what the fallen angels do, they lead people away from God, just as the religions do. That's their whole purpose. In the Old Testament, we get another term called the host of heaven, which is Saba Shemaim. In the Hebrew, host is Saba, T-S-A-B-A. H might be an H on the end. But Saba is the word anyway, 6635. And this means an army of angels, which means that in an army you're going to have different ranks and a hierarchy and different orders. And so it's an organizational great number of these beings. And in Deuteronomy 4 and elsewhere, but Deuteronomy 4 is just one that I selected because it says in the instructions to Israel, do not worship the sun, the moon, the stars, which are all the host of heaven. And so we're being instructed not to worship these things. But these stars, just as stars are used for an allegory for angels,
right,
through the New Testament and the Old Testament. And a wandering star is something different, and those are understood as planets. And those are the 7 main planets that the main 7 gods have ownership of in terms of representing them, at least. They probably have a star as well. But so these are not the stars that we're told not to worship, but these are gods. This is the polytheist gods of the pantheon. And astrology comes from astronomy, which records the movement of the stars. And the theology or the philosophy behind astrology is that you have to have your faith in this host of heaven that we're told not to worship, these gods, because they control our fates as opposed to our destiny. And so the information is there that these are representatives of polytheism and the gods. So that's who we're told not to worship. But they're religions that they create, and we live in a world that we swim in polytheism, all the different kinds of the original religion of the angels all around the world, because they're the same basic religion, just different vernacular names for these gods, whether or not you're talking about El, Baal, Shemesh, Ashtaroth, Tot, Astarte, and Molech of the Canaanite 7. It's the same ones for the same days of the week that if you get into the Roman one of Saturn, Jupiter, the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, where those 7 planets are laid out. So not all of them are like that. Diana is in there for the moon, but she's a moon goddess. So,
right.
But you understand how those connections are made. So these are the seducing spirits and the doctrines of devils that are leading us astray. Now, devils there, that would be the doctrine of demons. But
yeah, when you kept saying planets, for some reason, and planos, does that have any connection to the Plantagenets? I kept thinking of that word in my mind.
Yeah, it is of the Plantagenet, absolutely, and Plantagenista.
Okay, so that's not a coincidence.
That's not a coincidence, because everything has allegories, and in this case, it's the genes of the Plantagenista, and the genes coming from those gods.
Yes, and that's where like the albigens, the gentry, and interestingly, Gary, I was going to tell you, here on Oahu where we live, there's major communities that have been set up just within the past 25 years or so, and they're always ending with the word gentry. There's Eva by gentry, there's Waipio by gentry, it's these Hawaiian words, and then it always ends with gentry. So I was thinking of your description of where that word came from. When every time I see these signs now, it's very interesting of how they've kind of taken over the island.
Yeah, I mean, just look at how much we see in the word genealogy and genes and all the derivatives of that has that word in there. It's just, in plain sight. We swim in their world and we don't even know the language they're talking.
Right. It's interesting too of how the language and how they speak, it's so heavily laden with allegories that they can understand. Like that's like kind of like their secret language, how they give each other clues, their language, their hand signs, their all these different allegories, and they are the only ones that understand it unless we learn how to interpret some of their things, which you've been bringing quite a bit to light.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Okay, next question. Unless you have anything else you want to add there.
Nope, that's good.
Okay. So from Kyle Hoff is asking, was Fra Mauro's map of the world made before or after John wrote the book of Revelation?
Typically, the secular historians date Fra's work to about 1450 AD, so well after the time of John and the book of Revelation. So what he did was create a map, which is, through the 7 sciences and their worship thereof. He's a very important individual, and he creates actually with his map the most accurate version of Europe that will be there for a long period of time. But he does a little bit bigger project than that. It's just that it's not quite as accurate as his depiction of Europe. And so what you have there is like a globe type of projection of a picture. And he's got Africa, Asia, and Europe on there. There's nothing on there in terms of North America. But it's in a globe sort of setting, and he's got the South Pole at the top of the picture versus other historians even before him that would reverse that. And he based his depictions. It took him years and years and years and years to do it. He based his depiction of the world in that sort of manner. And he used ancient sources. He used explorers like Marco Polo and others from around the world. He used information recorded by Ethiopian monks, and he used Ptolemy's map and presumably even more sources to create a conflation of these ideas and data to create this picture. So it is it's very interesting to look at, and quite an achievement at that time. Now, some people will date him a little bit earlier, but I would say he could be looking, because he's within this elite world. Of having knowledge of ancient maps, which was not unknown or uncommon for certain people who had a privileged access to it. So he could have been looking at maps that were way older than his time period, and he was. We just don't get, and I haven't done enough research to know exactly all the ones that he did, but it's an interesting picture. But it's done after the time of the Book of Revelation, so I'm not sure whether or not I gave enough information to answer the question. I was kind of thinking about why was the question being asked with relationship to John and the Book of Revelation, and I didn't really sort of come up with a concrete reason why that was being asked. But that's the information I know about Fra Mauro's map of the world.
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting and detailed map for sure. And to be written back, to be drawn and displayed all the way back from 1450, it's an amazing depiction for someone who, I agree with you. He had to have some type of knowledge and connections to be able to have that much detail without, consulting the royals, consulting the powers that be, whatever you want to call them. But let's go on to the next question. This one is from James Stephen Emery. What are your thoughts about the Shroud of Turin?
Well, certainly it's fascinating. I don't spend a lot of time on it. When I was younger, I watched quite a few shows and was really interested in it. I think the image that comes through on the shroud is really unexplainable. And you can make a really good case to date it back to the time of Jesus, and you can make a really good case that the supernatural quickening and resurrection of the spirit would be the likely way that would happen, and therefore capture his image. And on the superficial level, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. I don't put my faith in it at all. I think it's certainly a possibility. But I have one major concern, and why I wouldn't want to put my faith into it. So I would advise people to be careful with it. It's interesting. It should not affect your faith one way or the other, so don't let it. But here's the thing that's troubling, is it's an image of Jesus. If it is, in fact, the relic of Jesus and the shroud that was on him at the time he resurrected. Right. And it would go against the laws. Jesus didn't abolish the law. He just added the spirit to the law and the application. He didn't abolish the law, and he's the fulfillment of the law. And in that law, just as we're told in Deuteronomy 4, not to worship the host of heaven or make any images of heaven or on earth, would Jesus really leave an image of himself to be worshipped. That's the only thing I struggle with. But there is a preternatural nature to this shroud. But understand that the polytheists have a lot of occult knowledge. So they may have had knowledge to create a forgery, and it is going to be used to try and break some of the faithful's faith in the end time, when they, whatever they use it for to do that, as a forgery or blood types or whatever they're planning to use with it. Be careful of that. But my main advice is look at it as interesting, but don't put any of your faith on it, because they just would love to be like Lucy with the football.
Yeah, I totally agree, Gary. You have to be very careful with that. Let's go to the next question, and thank you for your answer. This is from Dale Stevenson. Why did God use Joseph to save Egyptians when they worshipped other gods?
It's a good question. And again, we don't get taught these things in the churches, and we ought to. And I mentioned earlier that Israel is a product of the 7 beast empires. And when I say a product of that, a product as in the interaction and how it shaped Israel, how it affected Israel, and how at times it was a big harm to Israel in their ability to fulfill the Holy Covenant. And thus we're going through the curses of the covenant versus the blessings of the covenant. And the blessings would have had a lot better history than what we've had if they were able to stay true to their Holy Covenant. Yeah. And so when we look at the beast empires, as I talked about that in Daniel 2, 7, and 8, to get to the 7, and Daniel 8 just as a different prophetic allegory to arrive you at the 7 beast empires, with the 4 splitting of the Greek Empire being 1, the 4 that come after Alexander is 5. Then comes Rome, which is actually part of the 4 that takes over. So that makes 6, and then the end time Roman Empire out of that ashes. And also from the same area the world one deduces Antichrist is coming from the 4 great empires of the Alexandrian Empire. So you get the 7 that way as well, with adding Assyria and Egypt onto the empires described in Daniel 7, and then we get the number of 7 in Revelation 17, and as it's depicted in 12 and 13 as well, with the same imagery. So that's important to understand, that we should consider both. The Bible isn't at odds in that prophecy. It's providing us additional information with the 2 ways of getting to 7. And understanding Assyria and Egypt helps us understand the interaction of the empires raised by the 4 winds of prophecy, as they're described in Daniel 7, to raise these beast empires. Assyria and Egypt, like all the others, have an interrelationship with Israel. So Egypt is the embryo. There needs to be a location to raise Israel into a nation. And it's so interesting to me, that's the same place that Mary goes with Jesus, to be safeguarded as a young sort of child nation until it's safe to go back to the land of the covenant. There's so many analogies there, but just thought I'd sort of mention that. Yeah. So Assyria is the one that will come as the Northern Empire is being punished for the violations, the Northern Empire of Israel. Israel is known versus the Southern Empire of Judah for the violations of the Holy Covenant, and they're going to disperse the northern tribes, which are still lost to this day, until the last 7 years, when they're going to be called back by name again in preparation for second Exodus. But it's Assyria that brings that destruction, and God brings them in for the violation of the covenant for that. So you see this relationship. And then the southern kingdom repents, and they get a reprieve from those curses. But then they backslide again, and then Babylon is raised up to do the same curse. Let's put it more as similar, because the southern kingdom isn't going to be lost into the nations and not being able to be identified. They're still going to be visible right from that point on. So they get taken off visibly in exile and stay in Babylon. So that's an action that's part of the curses of the covenant. And then Cyrus is raised up as part of the Persians, and he's going to start the process for Israel or Judah to go back to the covenant land. So you have that interaction, and it finishes up with the Medes part of that empire. So now you have Greece, which is going to be the next one up, and they're going to conquer the land of the covenant, and you're going to see some atrocities that will happen to Jerusalem and the temple at that time as well. And then you're going to have the Roman Empire that's going to rise up after that, and they're going to be the ones that are going to disperse Judah all around the world, not to be lost in the nations, still visible, but still a very similar type of punishment from the curses as with the northern tribes. So the first 6 beast empires are there as part of the choices that Israel makes. And so there's going to be this interaction again with Israel in the end time with the rising of the 7th empire. So God knows that they are polytheistic, but he needs a safe place away from the hegemony of the giant powerhouses that are in the covenant land for Israel to become a nation state, and then to go back and to defeat those giant nations.
Wow. Great information. Thank you so much, Gary. We are on the last question from the ones that were submitted from last month. So we'll see how this one goes, and we can always go into the new questions that people have been submitting today. This one is from James Gordon, and he asks, why are some people raptured at one point during the tribulation period and others left, presumably to endure more difficulty before the bowl's judgment?
It's a great question.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
It is. And so I'm going to give some interesting passages here, because the point I want to make before I get into it is that all the details are important. And we need to understand them in context and when it comes to prophecy or any other thing in the Bible. But in terms of prophecy, we need to understand it within the context and who it's to be applied to, whether it's Israel, Judah, the tribes, or the church. And we get those answers if we kind of put the pieces together. So the simple answer is, and I'll work back through the explanation by putting the answer out first, is it's really the weaker faith Christians that aren't going to be taken. So it's the true Christians that are still alive that are going to be taken in the rapture, and they would be probably akin to the first fruits who die for the testimony of Jesus. And we see 2 resurrections of that, one in Revelation 6, and then which died for their testimony, and then they have to wait for the other ones that are going to die for the testimony of Jesus. But not all those who would qualify for first fruits are taken. They're not killed. So those are the ones that are, I think, doing the testimony of Jesus in the end time and are the true faithful through the tribulation that they're going to be going through, are the ones that are going to go away in rapture. There will be lots of other Christians, but they're just not those true dedicated under any condition, any challenge, and are weaker. And some of them are going to be deceived by Babylon, as Jesus tells us that happens with the affliction in time of the tribulation, and the offended, or the scandalizio that leads people into deception, and the falling away that is talked about by Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2. So if we understand that, it's not that they are being segregated to be poorly treated. It's just, I think it's just the faith isn't quite strong enough. So now let's get into some of the passages. So 1 Corinthians 3 tells us some information about the destruction of fire that's going to be coming, as 2 Peter 3 talks about, for the last 3.5 years. And actually we're getting, destruction by fire earlier, but the destruction by fire that would destroy everything that's going to come through the bowls. And this has a connection to the timing of what we're going to be saved from, and who is and who isn't. So 1 Corinthians 3:15 is basically telling us that when our works are burned up, our true faith will be shown through in that, and we can be saved through the fire. So we're getting some information here of the allegory of this destruction that's going to come at 100%, except that Jesus steps in through the bowl judgments and destruction by fire. And so 1 Peter 4 goes on to say that there is this fiery situation that we have to go through, and this fiery trial. And that fiery trial is the Greek word parosis, and it means burning or refining or testing. Okay. And it's designed to try you in 1 Peter 4. So it's this, and fiery is an inserted word there, but you get that through the definitions as to why they would insert it. And then it's this fiery trial is there to try you, T-R-Y. And that's parasmos, 3986. And it means to go through adversity, a time of testing, to go through tribulation versus wrath, adversity, a time of trial and a time of temptation. This is a testing that we should not be surprised if we have to go through at any sort of point in time. And you can overlay that with the Christians of the time of Peter that are going through some of this, and use that as an analogy for what Christians are going through in the end time. So now that's rolled back to the Old Testament. And in Daniel 12:10, in the time of the last 3.5 years, in the time, and this is a prophecy dedicated to Israel and Judah for their resurrection, that some are going to be resurrected, some to everlasting life and some to death. And it's a parallel passage with Ezekiel 37 that has the dry bones in the second Exodus, also in that passage. There is going to be a time of a resurrection for Israel, and most people sort of say, well, this is going to be a Christian one, and they overlay the Christian application there. This is clearly for Daniel's people. And so it says in verse 10, as you move into the details of Daniel 12, it says, many people will be purified and made white. Now, this is the time as Daniel 12:1, and I just read that detail of 12:10 of purified and made white. Understand in 12:1, this is the time of trouble. This is the same word, sarah, as is an equivalent word to tribulation that's used in the New Testament, thlipsis, for affliction and tribulation, and the same word used in Jacob's trouble in Jeremiah 37 in the two chapters of the second Exodus, 30 and 31 there, and Jacob is going to be saved out of that in the last 3.5 years. Mm-hmm. So you have an analogy, but now we have this term purified and made white in the last 3.5 years. When they're not saved from what's happening in the last 3.5 years, they're going to go through their own issues in the Great Tribulation versus the tribulation of the saints. That's not seen since the Great Tribulation is tribulation that's not seen since the creation of the world. And so what's interesting here is that word white, to be made white, is Hebrew laban, and it means as in making bricks in fire, as in refining these bricks and making them for use, so great heat or fire being applied. And then they're going to be tried, which is the real key here, which is the Hebrew word saraf, meaning refined, tested, and trial, to be purified. So now you see the same type of language being used in Daniel 12 as we have in 1 Corinthians 3 and 1 Corinthians Peter 4, or 1 Peter 4. And now I'm going to take that knowledge and understand that they are part of the original covenant and we are part of the new covenant. And this refining is now going to be used for the people who aren't raptured. And how do we know that? Revelation 3:10, which wasn't fulfilled in the time of the 7 churches, just as there's details in each of those letters to the 7 churches that weren't fulfilled that are reserved for the end time, just as in Revelation 2:10, where there's 10 days of tribulation. And so 10 years, that would by implication be longer than the last 7 years. So tribulation starts before the last 7 years. And here's where it gets interesting in Revelation 3:10. We are promised 2 things in the New Testament. One in Revelation 3:10 is we're going to be kept from the hour of temptation. The other thing is we're going to be kept from the wrath, or the year of the wrath bowls, the year of the Lord's wrath, in the last year of the last 7. So we're going to be kept from the wrath and the hour of temptation. That hour of temptation is the same hour the power is handed over to Antichrist in Revelation 17 at the midpoint of the last 7 years. It's the same hour of the multiple Antichrist as is used in the epistles of John, where it's translated as times as opposed to hour. I think hour would be a better one because it fits in with the template of multiple Antichrist that Jesus is talking about right after the abomination. And in terms of where the detail comes from that, and it's the same hour Babylon is going to be destroyed, and the same hour Jesus says he's coming back at. It's all the same Greek word hora for hour. And we're going to be saved from the hour of that temptation of the mark of the beast, in my understanding. And that is the same word as used in 1 Peter 4:12 for to try, which is parasmos. So we're going to be saved from the hour of trial and testing and the destruction by fire. But those who are not taken will have to, just like the people of Israel and Judah, because they violated their covenant, they're going to have to go through the time of trial, saved from the wrath, but they're going to earn their salvation through the fire of the Great Tribulation.
Wow. Okay, lots of details. I was taking notes there, Gary. I'm going to go and fact check you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to go back through all these verses you gave. Thank you so much. You always give such, when you present a concept, you always give such good backup. So anybody else who's listening has questions about Gary's stance on when the rapture will occur, go through all those verses he just gave. That's my advice. Let's see, what do we have here? Okay, we have about 8 minutes left, Gary. Are you okay to go through the first question that was submitted today?
Sure.
Okay. And I think this is pretty appropriate for the times and also for the amount of time we have left in the show today. So from Seeker of Truth, they're asking, how does the U.S. government and Trump fit into end times prophecy?
So how does the end times and the age of Trump work into end time prophecy?
The United States government.
Oh, was the United States government. Okay.
And Trump, yes.
Yeah, so we have to look at the fig tree generation as being more than the last 7 years. So we have to look at that as some of the context here. And in that fig tree generation, we're going to have a rise of the 10 kings. And it's not that 10 kings have ruled before, because Antichrist arises amongst all of the 10. As is talked about in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. It's quite clear. It's in the end time. And there's going to be 10 kings ruling over 10 empires of the world government. So, and I've been on this train of thought since the early 90s that this is not as what was being talked about as, the European community growing to 10 states, and that's going to be the ruler of the world. I was looking at a global basis and 10 groups of nations and empires. And the polytheists look at it as in the same way. So the Club of Rome divided the world into 10 groups of nations, which is very similar to what the United Nations has done. And you can Google the Club of Rome and the United Nations and see how they've split the world up into those 10 groups of nations.
They have their own little map there, right? I've seen that before. It's interesting because it's 10, just like in prophecy. I mean, people are thinking, oh, these polytheists, they don't read our Bible, but of course they read our Bible.
And they put how they're going to do it right out in plain sight. You just have to sort of wake up and take note.
Yeah, they have to. That's their religion. Yeah, they have to. So it's just crazy.
I don't think that Trump is the Antichrist. And I would also look at the U.S. as having an important role in the end time. But what I would look at is the United States playing a large role in the end time, and Trump moving that forward, so to speak, in terms of positioning for the end time. I just don't think Trump has the right sort of genealogy and stuff to be able to become an Antichrist type figure. And I think his age is up there too high, and there's still a lot of things that need to be done. So I'm kind of looking at Trump just move. He may not be working in conjunction with the bloodlines that create the New World Order, but he's not necessarily against it. And so some of the things he may be doing, he may be thinking is just right, or he may be trying to do it in sort of getting ahead of what he knows is coming. So he's going to position the U.S. to have a larger role in the New World Order than a smaller role that the Western European bloodlines would like to suggest, just as China's going to do the same thing, Russia's going to do the same thing, expect other players to come up. So that means there's going to need to be, unless the U.S. is destroyed, which I don't think is going to be the case, is the U.S. is going to be part of a major economic community, one that they either head or one that they're going to acquiesce control of to the English bloodline. But it's going to be part of the 10. So when you see Trump moving towards creating a zone, military and economic, from Iceland to make it Greenland, but it will be Iceland, and then probably Britain after that to Panama, he may be envisioning setting up that and getting there first, so he gets as many assets for this new world order that's coming, and he can play a more influential role. So he's either working that agenda or he's trying to get there ahead of time, but not in conjunction with being a partner in the new world order. He just understands it's going to be a realistic thing, and he's going to try and get there first. So and everything I see is he's not stopping the New World Order from happening. He may be delaying the speed of which the Western bloodlines would like to implement it. So the U.S. will play a large role and will be, as I say, either a dominant force in one of the 10 kings or will acquiesce to a bloodline, and likely it would be part of the English bloodline if they're to acquiesce. Now, I would also suggest to people that if you want to read more about a passage that would fit America in the end time, match that up with what is provided by Moses and provided by Joseph to the 10 tribes, and look for Manasseh as being the U.S. and Ephraim as being England, and apply those prophecies to England and to the U.S., U.S. being Manasseh. And then match up the prophecies from Manasseh with Isaiah 18, with the passage of the land of the whirring wings or the shadowing wings, depending on which translation that you're reading. And that to me, describes the U.S., and not as an empire, but as a very, very powerful nation. And yes, I have a quick amount of time to give some of the things that are important here. So here's the one, some important passages in 18:2, starting with, they send their ambassadors by sea all around the world. And they are a nation that is terrible from their beginning. And it's a river that is crossed over by many rivers, many powerful rivers. And you look at that as goring the nations, with the other passages from Genesis and Deuteronomy as it reflects to Joseph, Ephraim, and to Manasseh. They gore the nations around the world, and they have all of the gates or the ports or the islands and things that they need to be able to do that. But there is a destruction that comes for them before the harvest, and then the time of the ensign, which is the same timing as the sign of Jesus, that's provided after the abomination in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and in the accountings of Luke. And at the time of the trumpet. So before the wrath bowls and in the time of the trumpet and the ensign is when there's going to be a destruction, and before the harvest. And understand the harvest is Armageddon. So if you want to see something about the U.S. that I think you could apply particular, go to that, but then also then backpedal into the blessings for the tribes in Genesis and in Deuteronomy.
That's very interesting. And thank you so much, Sherry, in the chat. One of our moderators put the verse Isaiah 18, verse 1. I never even really looked at that verse, but it totally makes sense because it talks about Sherry put in here, Isaiah 18:1, woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. And you look in the Gihon River. It says it surrounds the entire land of Ethiopia. And we know that Ethiopia is what we call modern day Africa now, if you look at older maps. And so that river would definitely
North Africa, to be particular.
Specific. Yeah, so it would have to be the Americas. We're at the end of our Ask Me Anything. Thank you so much, Brother Gary, and we appreciate everyone participating in the chat. We look forward to next month where Gary will be addressing more questions. Have a wonderful evening, and shalom, everyone. Thank you, Gary.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
When Justin and I found out we were having a little girl, we named her Eliana and started dreaming of what life would be like with her, where we would take her, what we would teach her, and of course, what we would read to her. One day we walked around a bookstore looking for books we might want for her and found nothing. So we started brainstorming what exactly we would want. Even from a young age, we wanted her to know and understand the heart of God and hidden truths that are in ancient biblical manuscripts like the Book of Enoch, and the idea of the Prophecy for Children series was born. Justin got hard to work and praise Yah released the Prophecy for Children series. We are grateful for the support and amazing feedback from others who have been wanting the same for their children. With our newest addition to the family, Ezra, we also added Enoch's Judgment of the Giants to this prophecy series. We're excited to keep writing books for our children to share with our truth-seeking family. To order these books today, please check out sacredwordpublishing.com/collections/children's-store.